she said, look, somebody from the CDC is gonna meet you. I don't know if they're gonna meet you on the plane or right when you get off or whatever, but just be aware. It's hard to fully express just how amazing it is to be back here. See, since I last saw you, I spent a full month on the road. And not just any month, and not just any road. It started in February when I went to Miami for the Ground Up Festival with Snarky Puppy.
This will be in the vlog.
You might notice that I'm doing this. I've got a t-shirt in here, but one of the benefits of playing quiet, I find it actually helps my embouchure, which is a little weak right now. We had a great week there. It was just filled with incredible music and people.
You can turn almost anything into something that works or not, depending on what you do with it.
Even then, I look back on it and I think, okay, that helped me to grow.
1:12 in the morning. You know how when you try to take a nap and then you spend the whole time of the time for the nap just going, I gotta fall asleep, and then you fall asleep like 5 minutes before you have to wake up. That's what I just did. Thank God it happened when it did, because at that moment in time, the word coronavirus wasn't even floating around, at least in that neck of the woods. Initially, my plan was to go home for a week between the Ground Up Festival and the tour in Europe with my band, but something actually came up kind of last minute, and I ended up in Japan for a week. So I flew home from Miami to LA, saw my family briefly, and the next day was headed to Japan. So I spent a week in Japan, and that was at the beginning of the coronavirus worries. Japan had about 130 cases around that time. People were wearing masks. The streets were fairly empty. The thing that I'm doing this week that I was saying came up kind of last minute. Tomorrow I'm going back home, and the next day I go straight to Europe. Got to see my family for one night. Right now I'm going to pick up our son at preschool. Wow. And the next day, the 26th, I was off to Europe. So we got to Stuttgart, it was cold, it was snowing. Night number one.
That jazz life.
That jazz life. Where are we? Stuttgart. Stuttgart. Things were definitely ramping up in the coronavirus department. Just before I'd left Japan, the Wall Street Journal had a cover image of people in Italy wearing masks and queuing up to get supplies, etc. And I was concerned, definitely. I had reached out to the booking agents and stuff to say, are we still good to go? So there we were in Europe, in Germany, getting started. The next day we went to Italy.
So it's 7 a.m. in Stuttgart. This morning we are off to Sardinia.
We went to the island of Sardinia, which at that time didn't have any cases.
So we made it to Sardinia. Sardinia? Look at this beautiful balcony, this place we're staying. Where are we right now? What's this place called? It's like we don't have sunsets in California or something. No, we don't have sunsets in California apparently. Come on.
We were there for a few days. It was feeling a little weird. Things were definitely getting canceled. Then we went to Rome.
This airport is kind of a ghost town. Made it to Rome, but hotel rooms were not even booked for us. So I'm supposed to do a clinic starting in 15 minutes, but we just got to the hotel room and had to sort out that whole thing. Yeah.
Played a couple shows in Rome at a venue we'd played last year that was sold out, so they booked 2 shows this time, and we ended up playing 2 shows to almost no one in each show because the people really were not showing up. At that point, things were getting iffy in Italy.
Got home at 2, and yeah, at 7:30 we are heading to the airport at 8 to go to Munich. I'm a little bit anxious because they started canceling flights on Lufthansa. They started canceling flights to Italy and reducing flights out of Italy, and we're flying on Lufthansa, and we need to get out of Rome today. Empty.
And we went to Germany again, to Munich.
Und sie sind seitdem ein fester Kern. Sie spielen für die Bob Reynolds Group.
But then the next day, Lufthansa canceled flights to Italy. So this was really the beginning of what I would have now come to explain as sort of like being at the front end of a tidal wave. Everywhere we were going, things started to close, like a domino effect. Like concerts getting canceled, venues closing, cities closing, and then eventually countries closing just days after we would be there. Then we went to Prague. I wasn't sure what to expect at each show. Except for Rome, they were all really well attended. But just to give you an idea, the promoter in Italy, when we were there, he had just spent that day canceling 50 shows that were coming behind us, including like a Starkey Puppy tour.
We are in Prague now, playing a club called Jazz Dock tonight.
So we were in Prague, then we went to, did we go to Germany again? It's a little bit foggy. I think then we went to Berlin.
We played Prague last night, not the style of music, but the city. And we're headed to Berlin this morning.
And then we went to Madrid, and we were in Madrid for a few nights, and by that time things were getting dicey, but again, the show was still well attended. We did 2 nights there, everything seemed fine. But the club that we played in Madrid, which I have a love-hate relationship with, I love the club and the people are great, but it's the same club where a couple of years ago I dented or bent the neck of my tenor sax because it has a really low ceiling at this club, and I had bent the neck. But again, that's another story. I love the club though, the audience, the vibe there is great, and we had 2 really fantastic shows there. The downside was that club, after our show is over, it actually turns into a club, like a dance club. So imagine this, we finish the show and people leave, some people are milling around and whatnot, but there's this whole new crop of people who've been waiting out on the sidewalk to come in for like a, DJ dance club night. So I'm trying to sell CDs and talk to people. I had the physical CDs for Runway with me, and I'm trying to say hi, shake hands. The only way I could hear a darn thing anybody said was to get right up in their face, which of course, not supposed to do, but what was I gonna do? I mean, I literally couldn't hear anybody. So I was in very close contact, and to make matters worse, there was, in that entire club, in the men's and the women's bathroom, there was no soap, no soap anywhere. So not only could I not wash my hands, nobody was washing their hands. And I was there for 2 nights. Then I went to Darmstadt, Germany. It's gonna be like 14 nights in a row of playing when this trip is over, which is intense. I was there for 2 days, did a guest appearance with a big band, did a masterclass. On the second day in Germany, we were sitting at dinner, and that's when I started to feel symptoms. It began with me just feeling almost like a curtain coming down of fatigue. Like I just felt really tired all of a sudden. And then I felt warm, like a fever coming on. Woke up the next morning on a Tuesday morning, and it was time to go to the Netherlands to meet up with the rest of my band. And that's when I didn't feel good.
I can't recall ever hearing it this quiet at an airport. I just got to Amsterdam. I'm gonna get my bags and then figure out how to get back upstairs. I gotta get a train to Eindhoven. This dude on the plane shows me his phone with text in Russian. He's asking me a question. I can't figure out what he's saying. It turns out he's asking me for a lighter.
I didn't know what was going on, but I had these symptoms. I had a dry cough, I had a fever, I felt like crap. Now by this time, the flights that I'm on and the airports I'm in were fairly empty, but again, everything was still functioning and the shows were still going on. I got there and met up with the guys in the band, and right away they could tell something was wrong. I looked really pale and kind of probably clammy. I certainly felt that way. I tried to get a thermometer. No pharmacies had thermometers or hand sanitizers or any of these things. And every moment you're looking at the news, things are getting worse. They had closed Italy by this point. They had closed down Madrid by this point, which we had just recently left. So there we were, and I asked the good people who were taking care of us at our first stop in the Netherlands, like, hey, I think I have a temperature. I'd like to get it checked out, which was scary to even ask the gentleman who was driving us around, but he pulled over and he called 2 different doctors, neither of which would see me because they were scared that I had it. So I was like, all right, great. I can't take my temperature and a doctor won't see me. Wonderful. We decided it'd be best for me to skip sound check and rest, which I did, and felt a little bit better. Didn't really eat. By this point, I didn't have much of an appetite. And, anyway, I had the really nice guy there brought me a banana. That's what I had for dinner. Played that show, got through with the show, and the next morning was rough. I woke up kind of early in the morning feeling super dehydrated, definitely had a fever, was coughing, like a dry cough, and when I would go to have water, sorry, this is gonna be a little bit TMI, but I would throw up. My body was convulsing and I was throwing up, but nothing was coming out. And I was super dehydrated and I couldn't keep even a drop of water down. I was literally taking a sip of water, swishing it around and spitting it back out just to try to wet my mouth, but I couldn't swallow any of the water or I would just throw it back up. And this went on for a few hours and I was getting ready to cancel that night's gig, but we had a long lobby call, or a late checkout rather. So I thought, let me just wait. And I was able to get a little bit more sleep, and eventually I was able to get some water down. And remarkably, I felt much, much better a few hours later. So I was glad I didn't cancel that show, which ended up being Rotterdam that night, which we went to, and again, weren't sure about the audience turnout, but it was nearly sold out. There was probably only 15 or 20 people who didn't show up because of the virus scare. That show was really rough for me to get through physically. Did not feel good at that point. But we were close. We were close to getting home. We only had one more show the next night. And that's when everything changed. About 2:30, the hotel room phone rings, which is rare these days, right? Not my cell phone, but the phone in the room. I answer the phone and it's Ruslan, my piano player. He's down in the lobby and he goes, Bob, we have to go now. Trump just announced a travel ban on all flights from Europe to the United States. And I freaked out. At this point, I've been gone for a month. I knew I had something. I don't know if I had the coronavirus, but I had something. And I was terrified I was gonna get stuck in Europe for 30 days. So it's about 3 o'clock in the morning and we start calling the airlines. Me, Yannick, Ruslan, nobody can get through to 3 different airlines. At best, you get that message that says, we're experiencing high call volume, but we can call you back in more than 2 hours. And then I'd press 1 to get the call back and it would say, sorry, that is not a recognized. So We pack up, we decide to meet in the lobby, get an Uber van to Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, and we get the process started of trying to change flights, etc. Fortunately, all three of us were able to change our flights, and we canceled the last show. I'm so sorry to the folks who were going to be there in I can't say the town even, Wageningen. We will come back someday. But anyway, we had to get out of there. Russ and Yannick are foreign nationals, not US citizens, so we didn't know what was going to happen. We just knew that it was going to get worse the more we waited. By this point, I'm wearing a mask, fly to Heathrow, and then from Heathrow to LAX. Fortunately, nobody was sitting with me. I was feeling pretty crummy. And when I landed at LAX, I got a message from Nora, from my wife, saying, call me, there's a plan in place. So I call her, she said, look, somebody from the CDC is gonna meet you. I don't know if they're gonna meet you on the plane or right when you get off or whatever, but just be aware. So there I am getting off the plane thinking somebody in a hazmat suit is gonna come on the plane and get me. Nobody gets me. I get off the jetway. Nobody's there. Nobody's at the gate. Nobody asked me where I'd been, not even like what countries I'd been in. I sailed through customs. Nobody asked me anything. Again, I'm wearing a mask. I went straight up to the CDC. They just had a little section with 2 CDC employees. That's Center for Disease Control. And 2 staff people wearing masks. I went straight up to them and I said, hi, I've been in Japan, Italy, Spain, Germany, the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and I have a fever. Do you want to see me? And they said, have you been in China or Iran? And I said, no. And they said, then go ahead. That's all we're looking for. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm like sweating, wearing a mask, and I've been in the front line of all these countries that have shut down.
3:30 Los Angeles time. I made it back today after quite a fiasco. Last night I haven't slept since whenever that was. Ruslan woke me up at 2 a.m. After Trump's speech last night, so 2 a.m. in the Netherlands, and that was when this all got started. We were like, we gotta go. We gotta get out of here.
Nora came and got me. We still didn't know what was going on. We're both wearing masks. She's in the front seat, I'm in the back. We drive like an hour and a half to get to the hospital closer to where we live. I end up in the hospital, and there it's more like a scene out of the movie E.T., and some hazmat people come and meet me. They think I've already tested positive and told my wife, like, what? We thought he was gonna take an ambulance from the hospital. Now you're maybe infected. You gotta go home for 5 days. Our kids were at a neighbor's house. You're like, you can't see your kids for 5 days. I mean, it was getting scary at that point. I was just glad to be back, not only in the States, but close to home. That was the major thing. But so I go in the hospital, I get tested. I got a bunch of swabs up my nose. They tested me for 4 or 5 different things. So I got like, I don't know, 6 or 8 different swabs. And then they found out I had not yet tested positive. So they were a little less freaked out. They're like, you can go to a hotel. It's okay if your wife picks you up. So I end up making my way to a hotel. This was a Thursday night, by the way. And they told me, you don't have the flu. It'll take 3 to 4 days to find out about the coronavirus results. The next morning, Friday morning, I wake up in the hotel to a text from Nora saying, call me, you don't have COVID-19. So I call, she's like, the hospital called, you don't have it, you're clear, you just have the flu, you have influenza A. And I said, well, that's weird because yesterday they told me I didn't have the flu and it would take 3 to 4 days. Yeah, I don't know. I still had a fever, so I was still infectious with at least the flu. So I stayed in the hotel. And then the next day, Saturday, I was like, something doesn't seem right. I call the hospital back and I explain all this. And they said, yeah, sorry, we made a mistake. We tested you for 4 coronaviruses, none of which you had, but none of those were the COVID-19 results. I was like, what? They're like, yeah, that's gonna take at least like 5 days because we're so backed up. And at that point I'm thinking, well, I've already seen my wife and kids. Granted, I didn't touch them, but I got, she brought them to the hotel so I could at least see them from a small distance. So I'm a little bit freaked out about that. Still feeling terrible. Saturday goes by, Sunday goes by. Eventually my fever got to 102, which was a little scary. They said you should call us if it gets over 100.4. I took a cold shower, took some Advil, the fever came down, and that night my fever broke. I'm still quarantined and I don't know yet the results of the COVID-19 testing. I do have influenza A and it has been rough. I've had that all week, but last night in that bed, I think my fever, I hate to speak too soon, but I think my fever finally broke. And next day, still no information. Next day, still no information. I can't get anything. And now at this point, we're starting to know people who have been tested after me and received their results and not traveled out of the country. So I was concerned. Long story long at this point, it took 7 days for me to get the test results back. And finally they did come back and I tested negative for the coronavirus. I had influenza A, and not only, so I didn't have this year's flu that they make the vaccines for. I had like a vintage era flu that when they told me it was, it's a long name, and I looked it up. It's from 2009. I literally had a flu from 2009 that's a direct descendant of the Spanish flu from 1918. Now, given the timeline of when I started to experience symptoms, I seem to have picked that flu up in Madrid of all places. So yeah, I got a vintage Spanish flu while I was in Spain. Amazing.
I've been in this hotel room now for, I guess this is my 7th day, and I just found out this morning, 7 days after being tested, that I do not have the coronavirus.
I'm home with my family now. That is my coronavirus tour story, and now that I'm home and have more time, I'll be able to make some more of these videos that I've been putting off because I haven't had the time. So in that regard, it's a gift of time right now, which I'm very much looking forward to. Like I said, I've been on the road way too much in the span of the last year, and I'm really, really happy to be home with my family. So stay safe and be healthy as best you can, and we'll talk soon. Hi.
Dada,
Yeah.
can we come here every day except raining days?
I bet we can do a lot of days. I don't know if it'll be every day, but I bet a lot of them. Sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah, having fun?
How do we go every day except Monday?
Oh, we'll think about that.
Dad,